The twin suns of Zakar Prime burned with merciless heat as the drop shuttle hissed onto the landing pad. A metallic groan echoed through the air as the bay doors opened and released a wave of heat that rolled over the steel surface like breath from a forge. Out of the shimmering air stepped a single figure, short, compact, and plainly human. Private Mira Wynn adjusted the straps of her backpack and blinked up at the towering gates of the Zakar Military Academy. The emblem of the Galactic Concord, two intersecting blades across a burning star, gleamed above the archway. But it was the silent ranks of alien cadets beyond the gates that truly caught her eye. They stood taller, broader, faster. Most of them wore exosuits or skeletal enhancements visibly fused into their limbs and spines. Their eyes glowed with night vision overlays or bioscanners. Mira's didn't. She had only the standard issue fatigues, a water canteen, and the strength of her muscles born from Earth's brutal gravity. As she stepped across the threshold into the academy, a low hush spread through the courtyard. All eyes turned. She felt the weight of 100 stares as whispers rose in dozens of dialects. A few chuckles echoed around her. No one approached, but the message was clear. She didn't belong. Later that morning, during orientation, the cadets were divided into squads. Mira was assigned to Delta Squad, known across the academy for producing frontline infantry and orbital shock troopers. She stood at attention among 15 others, no other humans, only reptilian, avian, and crystalline species, each one genetically engineered or born for war. At the center stood Cadet Jorak, a Cravian warrior with bone-white scales and silver-armored limbs. He watched Mira with a mocking grin, then turned to his squad. "Look what the council scraped off a backwater," he said, his voice sharp and hollow through his modulated breathing chamber. "Bare hands, no augments, and a species that still uses fire to cook." The cadets laughed. Mira didn't flinch. She stood straight, her face unreadable. One of the instructors, Commander Shurl, a towering insectoid with a chest full of medals, stepped into formation. His compound eyes swept over the group. "This academy will not break you," he said. "You will break yourselves or be broken by your failures. You've been chosen because you are the best your systems have to offer." His gaze paused on Mira for half a second, unreadable, then moved on. Training began immediately. Mira was already drenched in sweat by midday. The Zakar environment was harsh, gravity slightly heavier than Earth's, but the heat and double solar radiation made every movement a battle. The other cadets glided through their routines, assisted by cybernetic joints and advanced muscle tissue. Mira struggled. She lagged behind in sprint drills, barely passed the neural reflex tests, and collapsed during the simulated zero-atmosphere endurance trial. At every failure, Jorak made sure to comment. "Try not to die before dinner, soft shell," he sneered. "I've seen juveniles do better." Mira said nothing. She wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve and returned to formation. That evening, as the cadets ate their protein supplements and nutrient slurry in the mess hall, Mira sat alone. The others had formed circles, exchanging stories in a mix of growls, clicks, and digital pulses. Occasionally, one of them would glance her way and chuckle. She picked at her tray in silence. In the far corner, Jorak leaned back in his seat, his arms crossed behind his head. "She'll wash out in a week," he said, loud enough for others to hear. "Humans are clever little monkeys, but clever doesn't carry ammo across a war zone." His squad mates laughed. Even some of the other squads smiled. Mira stood up, tray in hand, and walked past them without a word. Jorak smirked. "Enjoy your last night in a bunk, softshell. Tomorrow we show you the pit." She had heard whispers about it already. The sand pit, a Zakar tradition. An unofficial initiation for those the squads deemed unworthy. It wasn't sanctioned by the instructors, but it wasn't forbidden either, just ignored. Mira knew exactly what it was, a test wrapped in humiliation. She also knew it was coming. At dawn, she was woken not by the academy's alert system, but by the hiss of her dorm door opening manually. Jorak's face appeared in the dim light, smug and self-assured. "Rise and shine, little recruit. Time to prove yourself." She followed them in silence, her boots crunching against the gravel paths that led beyond the training fields. The air was dry, the sun's barely over the horizon, but already heat shimmered across the dunes in the distance. The sand pit was a wide, open circle of compressed stone surrounded by a low ridge. 2 portable grav amplifiers had been placed at either end, tuned to triple the local gravity. A flat crate, heavy, dark, and sealed, sat in the center. Mira knew it by sight. A standard 200-kilogram supply pack meant for vehicle transport. Her task would be to drag it from one end of the pit to the other. The cadets formed a semicircle around the perimeter. Some brought their breakfast, some recorded on their holotabs. No one spoke directly to Mira, not yet. Jorak gestured dramatically at the crate. "There it is. Simple enough, just get it to the other side, or admit Earth breeds cowards and walk away." Mira dropped her pack and stepped into the pit. The shift in gravity hit her instantly. Her legs buckled, and she fell to one knee. Laughter erupted behind her. She gritted her teeth, forced herself up, and took a slow step forward. The ground dragged at her like invisible chains. Sweat already pooled at her collar. She reached the crate and crouched beside it. Her fingers brushed the metal edge. It burned with absorbed heat. She stripped off her jacket and tore 2 long pieces of fabric from the inner lining. Carefully, she wrapped her palms, knotting the ends at her wrists. Then she stood and gripped the side handles of the crate. The strain hit her immediately. Her shoulders trembled, her thighs burned, and her spine screamed in protest. She leaned forward and began to pull. Inch by inch, the crate moved. The jeers began again. "She'll drop in 10 seconds, one cadet shouted. "Careful, Softshell, you'll break your fragile bones," said another. Mira ignored them. Her world narrowed to the crate, the rope-burned grip of her hands, the blinding heat, and the blistering resistance of the ground under triple gravity. The sand beneath her boots slipped. Her knees almost gave out. But she didn't stop. She adjusted her stance, leaned her entire weight into the effort, and pulled again. Another inch, another breath. Minutes passed. The laughter died down. The recordings paused. Jorak crossed his arms and scowled. Mira kept moving. By the time she reached the halfway mark, her arms were shaking violently. Blood soaked through the fabric on her palms. Her lips were cracked. Every breath came with a wheeze. Her legs dragged like they were encased in cement. But she did not stop. When she crossed the edge of the pit and let go of the crate, she collapsed face first into the dust. There was no applause, just silence. Then she sat up, chest heaving, hands raw and trembling. She stood, slowly, and without looking at anyone, turned around and began dragging the crate back. The silence turned to stunned disbelief. No one moved. No one spoke. She didn't stop until the crate rested in its original place. Then she fell again, but this time she didn't rise. She didn't need to. The infirmary lights buzzed overhead as Mira blinked through the haze of medical haze injectors and pain-dampening pulses. Her arms were still trembling even as she lay motionless on the cot. The synth gel wraps around her palms itched faintly, but she didn't touch them. She simply stared at the ceiling. No one had spoken to her since she had been carried off the sand pit by the 2 silent med drones that hovered like shadows over the Academy's outpost ward. Not even the medic, an emotionless, gelatinous Antari blob with tentacle fingers, had offered her so much as a glance of concern. She didn't need it. She knew what she had done. When the door finally hissed open, she turned her head slightly. Commander Shurl entered the room with a data tablet clutched in one clawed hand. His other pair of limbs stayed tucked behind his back in that stiff military posture she had come to recognize as his version of disapproval. He didn't approach her cot. He stood at the edge of the room and studied her. "You will report back to physical drills tomorrow," he said in a voice as dry as the desert outside. "Your display this morning was noted." Mira gave a slight nod, not trusting her voice yet. He narrowed his compound eyes. "And before you believe this was victory, know this. The Academy does not reward martyrs. You survive or you don't." Then he turned and left, leaving the door open behind him. Mira sat up slowly, her muscles tight, her mouth tasting of metal and ash. She stood with care, not because she needed sympathy, but because she had decided something in that moment. She would not fall again. Not publicly, not ever. The next morning, as she stepped onto the training field, all conversations died the moment she entered the perimeter. No one looked directly at her, but she felt the attention settle on her shoulders like a weighted vest. The squad formations were already in place, lined in military rows under the punishing sun. Jorak stood near the front of Delta Squad, his expression unreadable for the first time since she had met him. Mira walked past him without acknowledgement, took her place in line, and stood at attention. Instructor Varric, a floating sphere of neurosynaptic crystals, hovered forward. His light pulses flickered across the assembled group. "Combat readiness test, live terrain endurance," came his cold, emotionless voice through the implants in everyone's ears. "You will run the perimeter course, 2 laps, weighted packs, elevation shifts, no augments, no hydraulic assists. Your time determines your placement." Groans rippled through the ranks. Even the elite cadets hated this drill. Mira adjusted the straps on her issued pack, which now weighed 30 kilos, and stared at the uneven horizon that loomed ahead. The ground was sand, then shale, then a steep incline of sun-scorched rock leading to a plateau that shimmered in the heat. She didn't wait for encouragement. When the signal flare shot into the air, she launched forward with everything she had. The first stretch was simple, sand dunes, a familiar enemy now. Her boots sank and dragged, her thighs burned, but she kept a steady pace. Several cadets surged past her, including Jorak, whose long strides made it look effortless. Mira didn't attempt to match them. She had no illusions about winning. She simply focused on not stopping. The second stretch was jagged rock. Her boots scraped and slipped. A cadet ahead of her stumbled and rolled, hitting the ground hard. Mira jumped over him without pause. By the time she reached the incline, her breath came in sharp gasps. Her chest ached, and the bandages on her hands were soaked through, but her feet never stopped moving. One step, then another, a slower pace, but upward, always upward. When she reached the plateau, she saw the vast drop of the other side, a sheer scramble down jagged boulders and crumbling shale. Several cadets hesitated, calculating the risk. Mira didn't. She crouched low, shifted her weight back, and let the descent carry her. Her hands scraped against the stone. Her legs fought for balance. Dust and pebbles flew into her face, but she landed on her feet, heart hammering just in time to see Jorak standing at the edge watching her. He dropped down behind her moments later, landing heavier, more controlled, but not faster. They didn't speak. The second lap was hell. Every muscle in Mira's body screamed. Her vision blurred with heat and grit. The world tilted more than once, but she locked her jaw and kept going. She passed one cadet who was vomiting behind a dune. Another sat collapsed by a ridge, his eyes rolling. Med drones zipped overhead, scanning vitals. Mira ignored them. When she crossed the finish line, she didn't even look at the leaderboard. She collapsed to one knee, head bowed, gasping. Her uniform clung to her body with sweat. Her fingers twitched uncontrollably. She stayed like that for a long moment until she felt a shadow fall across her. It was Jorak. He didn't speak, but after a pause, he reached down and picked up her dropped water flask. He held it out. She looked up into his alien eyes, silver, slit-pupiled, unreadable. Then she took the flask. He turned and walked away without a word. The afternoon drills were worse. Weighted crawls, vertical climbs, gravity press chambers. Mira kept moving through all of it. Some instructors began to take silent notes. Some stopped entirely and simply watched. Whispers moved between squads like static. Not about what she had done, but what she might still do. During weapon assembly training, a young cadet from another squad made the mistake of muttering something under his breath as Mira passed. It was meant to be a joke, something crude about Earth genetics. Mira didn't flinch, she kept walking. But the moment the joke reached the ears of Delta Squad, something strange happened. Jorak turned, his voice was cold and low. "Say it again!" The cadet looked confused. Jorak stepped forward. "Say it again! Loud enough for all of us!" The cadet hesitated, then looked away. That was the end of it. No one laughed. No one repeated the joke. In the barracks that night, Mira lay on her cot staring at the ceiling again. But this time she wasn't alone in her thoughts. She could hear footsteps slowing as they passed her bunk, conversations that paused and shifted directions. Even in silence, something had shifted. She sat up, flexing her fingers. Across the room, Jorak adjusted the strap of his own gear pack, paused for a moment, then walked to her corner. He dropped a folded square of cloth on her locker. It was simple, stitched, thick, for her hands. He didn't wait for thanks. When he turned and walked away, she watched him go, expression still unreadable, but now with something new in her gaze. Recognition. Respect earned not by title, species, or augmentation, but by grit, by endurance, by the refusal to fall, even when everything begged her to. The following week brought a shift Mira couldn't ignore. It didn't announce itself with applause or commendations. It came in silence, the kind that follows disruption and forces those in its presence to reassess everything they believed. No one said her name, but everyone moved around her differently now. During the morning briefings, the cadets no longer filled the space around her bunk with idle chatter. During drills, no one cut in front of her in line. No one tried to trip her during the sprint modules. The instructors noticed, of course, but said nothing. Mira didn't need them to. The change was already underway. On the third day after the endurance run, she arrived at the gravity press dome 10 minutes early. The chamber was a spherical structure of dense metal laced with a plasma conduit grid used to simulate different planetary environments. Inside, the pressure and gravitational fields could be manipulated to produce conditions ranging from Martian dust storms to deep ocean trench compression. The day's assignment was survival maneuvering under fluctuating grav weights, a test designed to break mental focus. Mira stood alone in the prep corridor, strapping on her oxygen harness when the doors opened behind her. Jorak entered, followed by the rest of Delta Squad. He said nothing as he walked past her, but dropped his helmet onto the bench beside hers. By the time the test began, the room was flooded with thick, artificially pressurized fog. Visibility dropped to a meter. The floor's incline shifted without warning. Mira moved low and fast, her boots scraping against metal as she adjusted her balance. She heard a crash behind her, a guttural curse in a language she didn't recognize, followed by heavy footsteps scrambling for control. The grav chamber shifted again, and Mira fell forward, catching herself with one hand against the wall. She gritted her teeth and adjusted her oxygen intake. The entire test lasted 16 minutes. 16 long, twisting minutes of shifting weight, disorienting silence, and total darkness, except for the dim red tracking lights on her suit. When the chamber lights finally came back on and the grav lock disengaged, Mira rose to her feet slowly, sweat pouring down her back. Jorak stood across the room, one leg scraped, one arm still trembling slightly from an overstretched support tendon. He looked at her. Not down, not through, just at her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he gave the faintest nod and turned to help one of the smaller cadets to his feet. After that day, Mira became something more than tolerated. She became expected. Instructors began pairing her with higher-ranking cadets for team drills. She was issued updated gear, not augmentations, but reinforced boots and flexible, shock-absorbent gloves. During tactical simulations, her voice began to carry more weight. The cadets in Delta Squad started adjusting their movements to match hers during formation drills. No one mentioned the sand pit. No one dared. But Mira saw it in their eyes now, the quiet awareness that she had passed something they hadn't. One night, during blackout survival exercises in the desert trench, Mira found herself alone with Jorak again. The stars above were sharp, tiny daggers in the sky, and the winds swept the dunes with cold that crept under her armor. She was setting up the motion beacons when Jorak approached from the shadows, silent as ever. He didn't speak, just crouched beside her and activated the ground anchors. They worked in complete synchronicity, no need for instruction. As she drove the final anchor into the rock, he finally broke the silence. "You weren't supposed to make it," he said quietly. She didn't look at him. "I wasn't supposed to care." His laugh was dry, low. "Yet here we are." She stood, dusted her gloves. "You plan to carry my gear next?" He didn't answer immediately. Then, "We carry for those who earn it." She glanced sideways at him. "So I'm halfway there." He gave a tight smile and walked off into the darkness. The next morning, Mira entered the weapons range to find her rifle already cleaned and loaded. Not the standard issue either. Someone had swapped it for a more precise variant with an upgraded scope. She looked around, but no one acknowledged it. During the exercise, she logged the highest accuracy score across all squads. Even Instructor Varric paused when the numbers appeared. Later that day, a transmission arrived at the academy. A challenge protocol. The visiting unit from the Zenth Dominion, known for its elite shock squads, had issued a formal simulation duel. 2 squads from the academy would participate. The instructors debated internally, but the outcome was obvious. Delta Squad had become the strongest team in the past rotation. Jorak gathered his squad that night, Mira among them, and laid out the training plan. His tone was direct, confident, but no longer condescending. Mira noticed how he looked to her after every strategic suggestion. At one point, she corrected a timing estimate based on the Zenth Reflex mod statistics. No one questioned her. They just adjusted the simulation parameters. The next day, the duel began. 2 teams entered the mirrored simulation hall, a massive digital battleground that generated real terrain and weapons without actual injury. Mira moved with purpose, her instincts honed, her body responding faster than her thoughts. She took point in the second phase, coordinating the flanking maneuver around the Zenth assault turret. Jorak backed her up with suppressing fire. Another cadet, a razor-feathered avian named Creel, dove in with a precision strike that cleared the last defense wall. The match ended in 7 minutes. Delta Squad stood victorious. As the simulation dissolved into digital particles and the field returned to its blank white state, the Zenth commander stepped forward. He nodded at Jorak, then turned toward Mira. His expression twisted in something between confusion and reluctant admiration. "Human?" he said with surprise. "You were the one controlling the flank?" Mira simply nodded. He turned and walked away, muttering something under his breath. After the debrief, the squads returned to the dorms in silence. There were no cheers, no celebration, just that same electric stillness Mira had felt before. She sat on her bunk and began unfastening her boots. Jorak approached once more. He didn't offer words this time. Instead, he bent down, picked up her rifle case, and walked it to the armory, without a sound. By the start of the next rotation cycle, Mira had become an anomaly the instructors no longer treated with indifference. Her name appeared more frequently on performance boards. She was summoned to strategy rooms she hadn't previously had clearance for. She no longer waited to be assigned partners. She was the partner others requested. Even Instructor Sherrill, whose eyes rarely lingered on any cadet longer than required, now looked her way with a trace of consideration. Respect wasn't spoken aloud in Zakar Academy. It showed itself in silence, through a carried pack, an unchallenged command, or a weapon handed over before she even reached for it. Mira understood this. She didn't speak of her progress. She only moved forward, like a blade slowly pulled from its sheath. Then came the wall breach drill. It was part of the Academy's final survival gauntlet, a 3-day field operation on the outer cliff range where cadets were dropped in hostile terrain, given limited rations, and assigned one objective: breach a simulated enemy facility, extract an intel core, and return without detection. Most squads failed. Some didn't return at all. Those who succeeded had their names encrypted into the Academy's stone monument, not for glory, but for proving they had value beyond obedience. Delta Squad was deployed just before sunset. The dropship released them into a jagged canyon lined with toxic moss and shifting rock formations that made navigation difficult even with a map. Mira took point immediately, her eyes scanning the cliff shadows, calculating distance between outcroppings, watching the wind patterns as they curved around the rock. She didn't speak unless necessary. Jorak followed close behind, alert and focused, his rifle cradled against his chest. The rest of the squad moved in a staggered formation behind them, careful to avoid pressure mines hidden along the slope. The first day passed without engagement. At night, they set up a cold camp beneath a rock overhang, shielded from aerial scans. Mira didn't sleep. She stared at the pale stars overhead and listened to the quiet hum of the sensor net she had placed around the perimeter. At some point during the night, Jorak stirred from his post near the cliff's edge and sat beside her. He didn't speak, but after several minutes he handed her a protein bar he had kept hidden from his rations. She took it without comment. The second day tested them harder. Midway through a narrow pass, a proximity alert flashed red on Mira's wristband. She dropped instantly, signaling the squad to scatter. A sentry drone burst from a camouflaged alcove in the cliff wall, scanning the area with blinding pulses of light. Mira rolled behind a rock and flicked her beacon off. One of the cadets, a young reptilian named Kaz, moved too slow. The drone fired a stun burst that slammed him against the canyon floor. Mira swore under her breath, then bolted from cover. Instructors didn't monitor these drills to ensure fairness. They watched to study reactions. To them, casualties were data. Mira crossed the distance in seconds, keeping low, her pulse hammering. She grabbed Kaz by his harness and dragged him behind a boulder just as another burst hit the ground where his tail had been. She threw a strobe grenade toward the drone and turned her head away. The flash sent the machine spinning in a brief fit of visual blindness. Jorak took the opportunity to fire a precise electromagnetic pulse that fried the drone's propulsion coil. It dropped into the canyon with a metallic thud. When silence returned, Mira checked Kaz's vitals. He was breathing, but unconscious. Jorak knelt beside her. "He's done," he said. "We'll have to leave him." "No," she said sharply. "We'll carry him." His jaw tightened. "He'll slow us down." She met his gaze. "Then we'll move faster." He didn't argue further. The rest of the squad fell into step, adjusting the formation. Mira slung Kaz's limp arm across her shoulder and pressed on. Every step became harder. The sun burned overhead, the cliffs threw jagged shadows, and the air grew thinner as the altitude increased. Her legs screamed by midday, her throat raw from dust and dehydration. Still, she walked. She didn't allow herself to consider the weight of the body she carried, only the steps ahead. By nightfall, they reached the outer wall of the simulation compound, an obsidian barrier embedded into the cliff, surrounded by sensor turrets and motion-triggered defenses. The squad dropped low, hiding behind an outcrop. Mira laid Kaz down carefully and crawled forward to scout. She found a weak point where the structure's maintenance panel was slightly misaligned. It was a flaw, almost too small to notice, but just wide enough for one hand to reach inside. She returned to the squad and drew the layout into the dust with her finger. "Here, we move under cover of the storm," she said, glancing at the thick clouds gathering on the horizon. "The wind will distort the sensors. We breach during the flash cycle and extract the intel core within 6 minutes." Jorak studied her plan. "It's tight." "Then don't slow down," she said. He smirked faintly. "After you, soft shell." The storm rolled in like a living thing, wind shrieking through the canyon, kicking dust into the air, lightning flashing in arcs that made the ground tremble. Mira counted the seconds between pulses. When the third strike hit, she ran. The others followed. She reached the panel, forced her hand inside, and yanked free the master override wire. Sparks danced across her glove. The barrier deactivated just long enough for her to signal the squad through. Once inside, they split. Mira and Jorak moved toward the core chamber while the others held the access hall. Inside the vault, Mira disabled the final lock and reached for the core, a small, dense sphere of data crystals. Then something clicked. A trap. Not real, not deadly, but designed to test foresight. Mira froze, then pivoted her hand to the side and removed the decoy weight placed beside the real core. The red warning light blinked once, then stopped. She had chosen correctly. On the way out, motion sensors reactivated prematurely. Jorak drew his rifle and stood between her and the exit. "Go, I'll cover." "You leave, we fail," she said. "We stay, we all fail." Mira made her decision without hesitation. She tossed the core to him and stepped into the open corridor, drawing fire from the ceiling drones. Her suit's shielding sparked, warning lights flooding her vision, but she kept moving. Jorak dashed behind her and slammed the override key into the wall. The system blinked, then dropped all power. They sprinted through the dark, Mira's lungs burning, boots slipping on the floor. The squad was waiting. Kaz was awake now, barely standing, supported by Creel. No one questioned her, no one hesitated. Together they exited into the storm. 3 hours later, the simulation ended. Delta Squad returned with the core. Myra didn't speak as the instructors debriefed them. She stood silently, her uniform stained with ash and sweat, her eyes calm. Instructor Shurl approached and reviewed the mission log. He gave no expression, but his voice carried just enough weight when he spoke. "Functional, efficient, unexpectedly adaptive." Mira didn't react. Jorak stepped forward beside her, shifted his pack from his shoulder, and handed it to her. Not for her to carry, but for her to take. As its leader, and she did. The announcement came without fanfare, without even a formal address. A simple data pulse was sent through every cadet's wristband. Final assessment commences in T-minus 36 hours. No one spoke after receiving it. No one needed to. The final assessment was the culmination of every bruised rib, sleepless march, shattered expectation, and quiet humiliation endured inside the academy. Only a handful would pass. Those who failed were not expelled. They were simply reassigned to outer posts, given menial duties in logistics, drone maintenance, or planetary defense. Those who passed became something more: field officers, operatives, tacticians, and on rare occasions, legends. Mira read the message in silence as the barracks dimmed into sleep mode. She sat at the edge of her cot, unwrapping the faded bandages from her hands. The skin underneath had healed in layers, scarred, calloused, hardened. Her fingers no longer trembled after drills. They had become precise, like engineered tools. As she reached for a fresh wrap, a knock rattled softly on the doorframe. Yorick stepped in, arms crossed, his silhouette framed by the cold hallway light. "She wants to see you," he said. Mira didn't need to ask who. She followed him through the corridor into the instructor's chamber, a room cadets only entered once, either for commendation or reassignment. Inside stood Instructor Shurel, as rigid as ever, his compound eyes gleaming faintly. Behind him, a projection screen displayed the Academy's emblem and a list of squad formations. "You're being reassigned," he said without preamble. Mira's eyes narrowed. "Reassigned?" Shurel tapped the display. "For the final, you'll command Alpha Unit, Mixed Squad, Strategic Control. This is not an evaluation of your combat stamina. This is an evaluation of influence." Jorak shifted his weight behind her. Mira didn't look at him. She kept her gaze locked on Shurel. "And Delta?" she asked. "They'll remain, as observers," he replied. It wasn't a punishment, it was something else. "Why me?" she asked. Shurel's mandibles twitched slightly. "Because no one here follows orders like you. They follow you." Mira said nothing. She simply nodded once and left the room. At dawn, she met her new unit. 7 cadets stood at attention under the violet glow of the morning sky. None of them had trained with her. None of them spoke when she arrived. She recognized 2 from past drills, one a towering aquatic hybrid with gill plating on his arms, the other a narrow-eyed, cyber-augmented scout with 3 retinas and a permanent sneer. Mira stood in front of them and spoke only once. "This will not be about you," she said, "or your species, your strength, your records. This will be about how far you're willing to go without asking why. If that's not something you can do, leave now." No one moved. Then the gates opened. The final assessment was a full-scale live simulation of a galactic conflict scenario. 2 squads dropped on opposite ends of a hostile terrain zone, desert, forest, ruins, and frozen ridges, and were told to complete multiple objectives: establish a base, intercept the opposing squad's intel drone, and survive until extraction. Failure could be declared for disobedience, poor tactics, or full squad incapacitation. Mira moved like she had been preparing for this her entire life. Within the first hour, she divided the squad into 3 pairs, each with a clear function: recon, suppression, and recovery. She did not assign herself to any team. She watched, she coordinated, she listened. The desert portion was grueling: temperature spikes beyond biological comfort, aggressive wildlife simulations, and limited water drops. One cadet stumbled from heat stroke. Mira ordered a full stop, redistributed resources, and forced a rest cycle. When the scout objected, she silenced him with a single sentence: "If one of us dies, we fail. All of us." Her voice was calm, without bite, but it cut through every protest. By midday, they had completed the first objective and moved into the ruins. Mira chose a circuitous route, avoiding the obvious path. That decision saved them. An ambush drone awaited in the central corridor of the ruin, armed with stun rounds and sonic pulses. The other squad triggered it and lost 2 members. Mira's team waited in the shadows, monitored the chaos, and scavenged the drone's data core after the dust cleared. By nightfall, the weather turned. The frozen ridge was the last leg. High altitude, minimal oxygen, wind that tore through reinforced armor like claws. Mira kept the squad moving. She calculated breaks based on heart rates and limb fatigue. When one cadet fell behind, she looped back and carried part of his gear. No one offered. She didn't ask. She just did it. Hours later at the summit, the extraction beacon blinked into life. They had made it. Mira collapsed to her knees, her breath shallow, her vision tunneling. She didn't register the drones descending overhead, or the instructors observing from the cliff ridge, or even the loud chime that marked the mission's conclusion. She simply knelt in the snow, eyes closed, heart slowing, and then footsteps. Jorak approached, his rifle slung casually across his back, his armor dusted with frost. He didn't speak until he was close enough for her to hear without raising her head. "You didn't just lead them," he said. "You made them into something no one expected." She lifted her face to meet his. "Is that what you think this was about?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "No. This was about us. About all of us learning we were wrong." She exhaled sharply, something between a laugh and a sigh. Then she stood. When they returned to the academy, the squad was dismissed without a formal ceremony. The cadets scattered into the training fields, still absorbing what they had just been through. Mira returned to the barracks. Her gear was already cleaned and placed neatly at the foot of her bunk. But something else waited for her. A message. Simple. No sender. Just a single line. "Monument engraving approved. Mira Wynn. Sandpit Initiate. Alpha Command." She sat on her cot, staring at the message for a long moment. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in crimson streaks, Mira walked to the outer edge of the campus, past the obstacle yards, beyond the simulation domes, to the quiet rock face where the names were etched. She traced the edge of her own with one bandaged finger. No applause, no crowd, just stone, just proof. Behind her, quiet footsteps approached. Jorak, again. "You're not just one of us now," he said. "You're the one we measure by." She turned to face him, the wind tugging strands of her hair across her face. "I never needed to be measured," she said. "Just seen." He didn't respond. He only nodded, and for the first time saluted her. She did not return it. Instead, she walked away, her steps sure, her back straight, the shadows of the past falling behind her with every step. At Zakar Military Academy, no one spoke of the sand pit anymore. They only spoke of the human who walked into it, and walked out leading others behind her.